Good evening, everybody. My name is Bill Tyler. I'm the curator at the Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our program this evening. This is the third in our quarterly series that we do. This particular program is special to me because obviously I have a healthy obsession about Whalom Park. Having worked there, and I'm sure a lot of you have maybe worked there and spent a lot of time there. It's really was a great place. We had the opportunity to get these gentlemen to present this program. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think you'll enjoy it. Just one announcement. We do have some items back there for purchase, coffee mugs and books, Historical Society items. And on the other side, this summer we've been raffling off a park bench from Whalom Park. We've had it in our possession for quite a while, and it's just pretty much taking up space. So we decided as a fundraiser to raffle it off. So the tickets are $5 each, or 3 for $10. The drawing is going to be September 25th at noon. So by all means, stop by and take a look at it. It's really a nice piece of memorabilia. If you have a yard, you can have it in your yard or your porch. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Mr. Scott Lanciani from the Whalom Cooperative, and he'll begin the program.
Thank you. Welcome. Again, my name is Scott Lanciani, and I'm the president of the New Whalom Cooperative and the Whalom History Museum. We have Michael Kudermarsh, who's our IT web and curator, and Kimberly Kovac, who does our events.
Can't hear you.
Okay. I'm trying. I have, okay.
The library does.
So, again, this is Mike Kudermarsh, Kimberly Kovac, who's head of our events. And they'll be joining me during the presentation. Can everybody else hear me? All right? Okay. So we'll start in with a little bit of the history. And as I don't know if most of you know that Whalom opened in 1893, first trolley park in the country. It was built by the Fitchburg and Leominster Street Railway Company to increase ridership on the weekends. The street railway had Monday through Friday service for people who were going to work or the groceries, doing normal things like that. But they didn't have, when the weekends hit, they had nothing going for it. So they ended up building a park that was a dance hall, an English-style walking park with gardens, and they had some boats, a boat launch, and fishing, canoeing. They used to do picnics, and as the years went through, they started to add the rides and the other gaming and other facilities. In 1935, Henry Bowen purchased the park, and the Bowen family maintained majority interest into the mid to late 90s. And then, as we all know, the park closed in 2000, sadly, and we have some of their some items here that we brought from our collection. So today we're gonna go through the history, and we have a little video here for you, and then Mike's gonna take over, and we're gonna give you a little something that not very many people talk about during these presentations, these history presentations of the park.
Scott, it's a new thing. You put your own music with it. You scared half of the room. You just scared half of the room.
Sorry if I scared anybody. Somehow the audio didn't get connected. I came with the computer. That was my job. I did my part. So I apologize for all those I jumped. You know, medical is not supplied. It costs extra. But I do thank you all for coming here. I know you could all be at the Hopkins Fair looking at the monster trucks, so I appreciate you coming to see us instead. We promise to be just as excited. So, Whalom started out as a trolley park that was brought up, and eventually as it grew, it went from just being botanical gardens and animals and some swimming to actually starting to be more of an amusement park that we're more familiar with rides and attractions. The most notable attraction of any park is the roller coasters. And Whalom throughout the years had 4. Not only at one time, they only had up to 2 at a time. They ended up taking them out or they lost them. And they swapped them out. The first coaster they ever had was literally just called Roller Coaster. I know, very creative. It operated from 1901 to 1924, and Frederick Ingersoll was the builder and designer. It was a side friction figure 8 roller coaster. Now, what a slide friction is the original coasters that came out all kind of operated like jumping in an American Flyer sled and going down a hill. It had wheels, it rolled, that was about it. It went down a hill, up a hill, and there was wheels at the top. And there was a slight wheel on the side just so it wouldn't grind too much, and that was it. So it had to go down and then come up and slow down enough, because if you're going too fast, the car would just keep going. So they were very mild coasters. There's actually only one of these still operating in the world. And that's down in Pennsylvania. And Whalom had one of these when a lot of parks also had these. Moving forward, technology advanced. They added what's called an upstop wheel. That was the third wheel that went underneath the track so that the trains could go much faster. And when you get to that top of the hill, it could be going fast because that other wheel would catch up. So the train would stop, you wouldn't. You'd get that big airtime feel when your body felt like it was either coming off the seat or actually did come off the seat, which some of us love, some of us absolutely despise, and we'll never ride it again. So their second coaster was a Shooting Star. This coaster basically operated from 25 to 38. And if you notice, it actually used the whole back side of the park. It used up a lot of space. It was an out and back style with a lot of hills. This would have been similar in feel to things like the Yankee Cannonball, the Mountain Park Flyer down in Holyoke. Even maybe it would feel a little bit like the, not the Cyclone, but the coaster at Palisades. That was also an out and back style park. But it was all about hills, back and forth with a slight turn and back. The coaster was actually destroyed by hurricane. So they lost this due to a natural occurrence. They don't know the actual builder, but most likely it was PTC because they were the top builder of roller coasters at the time. And there's no records of it being built by their second biggest competitor, which was Trevor Engineering, that built the Cyclone up at Revere Beach. And so he was building stuff at the time. But there's no record of him building this particular one. And because the layout is a little more about hills and fewer turns, it's most likely PTC, because that was very common in that we want to get it there. We want them to feel that up and down feeling. And then, like I said, it was an out and back style. So basically went out, turned around, came all the way back. What's PTC? Sorry, Scott asked me to let everybody know what PTC stands for. PTC is the Philadelphia Toboggan Company. The Philadelphia Toboggan Company was a major, major builder from the 1920s on to like the 1950s. They actually still make trains. To these days, they rehab and make new trains. They stopped building roller coasters, but they also were most likely the builders of the dance halls, some of the possibly the skating rink pavilion. They did the skating rink and the dance hall at Canopy. The Cuddle Up, Crazy Cups at Canopy, they built that style ride, which you see around New England at Storyland Canopy. And it's very likely that they built the Funhouse as well, because it was style of their layout. Later on, they decided to build a nice little kiddie coaster. This one was made out of steel. This was the only steel coaster they ever had inside the park. It operated sometime in the 70s into about the 90s. It was in the very back part of the park where Kiddieland was towards the end of the park's operation. It was just an oval style with a steel structure, but one of the cool things about it is it was built by the Overland Amusement Company. They did not build a lot of coasters, but one of the things they did build, and unfortunately we do not have a photo of it, they built the fire truck that Whalom used to have. And that was one of the main things. They didn't do a lot of coasters, but they built a lot of those fire trucks. They would do those fire truck rides that would go around the parks. So they actually had 2 rides from that company available in the park. Now we gotta go to the big one. Flyer Company. This is the one everybody remembers because we all grew up with this one. Or at some point rode this one. And probably got scared by this one because the station shook and you could hear it from 3 miles away, and everybody thought there was an earthquake, but nope, the park was just open. But this was operated from the 1940 all the way to 2000. Then, unfortunately, it then stood SB&O for a while, standing but not operating until it was ultimately torn down. It was designed by Vernon Keenan. He did not design a lot of coasters, but the ones he did are extremely well known. By the time that Whalom's closed, there was only one other Vernon Keenan designed coaster still in operation, and that was the Coney Island Cyclone. He is very renowned for the designs he did, and he was a very good designer, and if anybody rode this and wasn't scared off by all the shaking and the layout, it was a very well designed figure 8. I know a lot of people have refused to ride it. The figure 8 style, what that meant is basically it crisscrossed itself. So instead of being long like the Shooting Star or like Yankee Cannonball that still operates today, it basically would go up, turn, and go through itself over and over again. And if you actually were to look at this from the sky, it looked like an 8. So it'd go over itself over and over again. One of the nice things about this design, though, is you had that really long outside drop. So unlike a lot of figure 8s that cut into the middle first, Vernon Keenan decided to take that first drop and keep it on the outside, so you had a really big, long, straight drop, more reminiscent of a standard roller coaster. You picked up a lot of speed and a big thrill drop right at the beginning. It was 2,640 feet long, it was 70 feet high, and it had the speed of 35 miles per hour, and it lasted for just under 2 minutes. But if you were scared of this thing, it probably felt a lot longer. So the next slide, I believe, is a video, so it might get a little loud again. So how many people recognize the song? Peggy O'Neill, you got it. I know that because my grandfather was a member of a harmonica group, and they played that all the time. So when I found that, I'm like, I got to put that on for my grandfather. So I wanted to move on from the roller coasters to the rides. And Whalom Park was not a large park. It was only about 33 acres total. And that was including the parking lot, the picnic rows, the skating rink, all the spots that were just trees around the park, the beach across the street. So it was not a very large park, but in that park, they tried to offer a lot of rides, and they got switched off. So we want to talk a little bit more about that. You can see a few things here, like the Turnpike, the Rotojets, flying scooters, and the Scrambler. So probably the most notable of the unique rides was the Whalom Park Carousel, which was built by Charles Luth. If you look at this one, we know some of the characters are not Charles Luth. This was when they put it back together. If you remember before the park closed, they actually auctioned off the carousel, but then they opened it back up. They got back some of them by donation, and then they got donations from other carousel manufacturers to fill in the entire menagerie so it could open back up. And the original one was assembled in 1909 and then brought to Whalom in 1912. It was a 50-foot platform that was ranged 3 abreast. The menagerie fitted 56 animals with 2 chariots. They had 35 jumping horses and 1 goat. I know, who would have thought a goat would jump? Standing, it offered 4 horses, 2 sea monsters like the one you see in the photo here, 4 greyhounds, 2 camels, 5 giraffes, and 2 more goats, as well as the very decorative chariots that were offered on the carousel. The Pirate's Den. Not a lot is known about the Pirate's Den because there wasn't a lot written down, not a lot of stories that were written before it was burned down by fire. There was some maintenance going on, and some dirty rags had gotten a spark against them and burned the whole thing down. I can tell you this photo is actually one my grandparents took. That's my aunt and my other aunt in the car there. I can tell you by the style that this was a, not PTC, but a Herschend style car. And basically it featured 2 stories, the 2 balconies, and I know there's a drop because my mom always talked about how the drop scared her. You know, the Tumble Bug is probably one of the best known of the classic rides at the park. It was extremely rare. Nowadays, there are actually more kiddie tumble bugs operating than there were adult tumble bugs operating 30 years ago. There's a ton of the kiddie ones operating. In fact, right now, there are only like 1 operating in the entire world. Everybody else has either put them into storage or stopped operating them. At the time the park shut down, there were about 5 in operation, including Whaloms. It was built by Trevor Engineering. It was just a very simple setup of a handful of cars that went around. It was either a tub like Whalom had, or in some cases they were themed to turtles, which is actually the theme of the current one at Kennywood that's operating today. And it was a nice, joyful ride of mild hills up and down. And it has a good force, although I'll admit I did think I was going to fall off the first time I rode it. I kept going around the hill and sliding towards the door. The Turnpike was one of the other well-known rides at the park. It was originally installed with these Streetco cars that had a bumper on the outside, so if you went too far to the left or too far to the right, it would correct your steering and keep you on the track. Later on, as those wore down, they basically kept the same layout, but replaced the entire ride with 2 Honda go-karts, which operated from, sometime in the 90s till the park closed in 2000. I was able to ride both the Streetco cars and the Honda ones. I'll admit by the time I was about 13, the Hondas were a little more exciting, but I did miss the old cars. The Funhouse was another big attraction at the park. I'm sure we've all had a minute to go on that. I regretfully did not get to go on it at the time when they used to have things like the turntable, which my mom always talked about how fun it was. I did, however, get to do the barrel and get yelled at for trying to do somersaults. But it was originally just a fun house, but for a while in the 80s it was known as the Fun Place. And then in 1996, the park rethemed the entire attraction to the Monster Motel, and it operated that until 2000. That was I knew I was missing a 0 somewhere. I kept going back to it and missing it, and I couldn't find it. So there's the 0 I'm missing. So just pretend there's an extra 0 and that it did not close down 1,800 years before it did. So that's a Laughing Cell in the front. Most people know that and probably kept them out of the ride to start with. And that's actually one of the props when it to the Monster Motel. I'll admit, I never got into the Monster Motel. I went to the park 3 times after they modified it, and it was closed every single time. The layout really showed the taste. It was most likely a PTC ride set up with a funhouse with most of their gags, with extra gags probably brought in by NAD, which was National Amusement Devices, that was known for building props for haunted houses, fun houses, and they actually built a few coasters such as the kiddie coaster at Playland in Rye, New York. A few other notable rides, yet not maybe as famous. The Paratrooper was always a favorite, the Octopus. The Rotojets were in the front of the park, whereas the satellite jets were in the other location. They were basically a similar type ride, that is 2 different manufacturers. The Rotojets are similar to the standard rides you see in most parks, down for the flying jets, whereas the satellite jets was the original manufacturer that built the Moon Orbiter at Canopy and actually do the Astro Orbiters at Disneyland before they got replaced by Zempolis. The Scrambler was always a park favorite, and they had more rides over the year. Like the slide, for example. We would always use that photos because it's a nice photo of a slide. So we want to talk a little bit about the concepts of these rides before they got the Whalom. And like I said, Whalom had a lot of rides over the years, and they had to come from somewhere. And before these rides got manufactured, they were marketed, and they had to have patents on them. So that's what this section is about. So this is actually one of the standard flyers you would have gotten in the mail or at a trade show for the Mangles Whip, which all of us probably rode the Whip. We'll talk a little bit more later about where these rides were and where they might have gone. You know, the whip ride itself, that is actually the original patent for it. As you can see, originally on what we've always seen the ovals, like Whalom and anywhere else, right? Playland, Knoebels, you know, many others. They originally decided that maybe they might want to do a triangular setup or maybe even a diamond setup where they could put more cars on and add more fun. There was actually a little note on the bottom of the description when they were filing the patent that it was a mild to exciting ride that would whip people around, you know, basically causing joy and excitement. And I think that's a pretty good write-up to what the ride offered. You know, the toboggan slide, my guess is most of us never got on. This was basically an attraction that was in the on the beach side before they had the big water slides at the back. It was actually built by Sellner Manufacturing and went on to build things like the Tilt-A-Whirl. And basically, you would climb to the top and ride a small sled down the slide into the water, which would basically bounce around the water. And then you'd get out into the water, swim to shore, and they'd winch the thing back with a line. And the next people would ride it down to the thing. The flying scooters, you know, built by Bosch Rico. They're originally designed and patented by Bosch. The Whalom operated these really well. They were one of the few that were out there you could actually snap, although the operator was told to yell at you if you did. I got yelled at many times. They were a great layout. They worked right. These were, we'll get into some where some of these things went later on. But this was probably one of the more notable rides because it was always right in the front of the park. You could always see it when you were parking. You know, the Ellie Bridge Ferris wheel, they operated one. This is very common for both fairs and carnivals as well as many parks. They operated a large model. But it was a very standard Ferris wheel, but theirs was one of the older styles that worked off of a band instead of the wheels. So if you remember ever riding this thing, it always sped up and slowed down much faster. And when it was at full speed, that car could swing out quite a bit as you rode to the top. We don't know completely if the park got this straight for them or if they bought, this was one of the few rides they bought off of another park, because this seemed to show up around the same time as they were getting a lot of rides from Benson's, when Benson / New England Play World shut down. They pulled in a lot of rides from there, so this might have come from them. The Tilt-A-Whirl itself, again, Sellner Manufacturing. This is a very common ride. Most parks have these. Sellner is still an operating company, so you can still buy Tilt-A-Whirls. Almost every park has one. Whalom's operated very well, had a great color scheme. I rode it every single time I went. Those always went really, really well. So the bigger question is a little more of where are they now? I'll open up my little notepad. When Whalom shut down in 2000, most of you know that everything was put up for auction. An auction was held, I believe it was 6 months to almost a year after the park closed. And then the rides were basically auctioned off the miscellaneous companies. Originally, the Ferris wheel, for example, went to the original owner. The yo-yo is another one that was owned by Finelli Carnival Lines, so they were leasing that, so it went to them, as well as the Sea Dragon. Pirate ship ride was being leased off of the Finelli, so it went back to them. The Carousel sat in place basically until it was torn down. The Flyer Comet PC, like I said, got torn down. It was October 17th, 2006, so nice birthday present for me, yeah. The flying scooters that we saw before were actually sold to Storyland, who had in turn never installed it because they found out that the swing arms were actually damaged. They wanted to. It sat in storage. I'm trying to get a word on whether or not they still have any of the tubs. But when they found out that the rod was damaged, they ended up buying a brand new one from Larson Engineering and installing the flying fish. But they did have hopes to do it. Storyland also did buy the whip, and that is still currently in storage behind the pumpkin coach. The Looping Rats and Starship, as you see in the middle, that one's got a little bit of controversy around it. The reports are that it got sold to a carnival line in Pennsylvania. There's not one carnival line still operating in them in Pennsylvania. But if anybody follows the Facebook page, I've put up some video of the rat cages operating at Knoebels Amusement Park down in Pennsylvania. Those were down for a long time. When they rehabbed them, they had announced they had bought a used one off of a local carnival line to use for parts so they can use the one that they had had since the 1970s and make one operational ride. And from a little bit I've heard from people who've been to the park and talked to the owners, that Whalom's was the one that they used for parts to get that up and running again. The Rotojets were bought but abandoned. They basically took the hydraulic mechanisms and then left everything else behind. Unfortunately, while we don't have any tubs, we do actually have one of the swing arms. The satellite jets that had originally came from Palisades Park were also abandoned, and the mechanism was taken, but not any of the equipment, but a lot of stuff basically got destroyed before we can get it. I'll get a little bit of some of the other words in the next slide. The turnpike was mostly abandoned. We don't know who bought the go-karts. The street go-cars were long gone. And then they basically just plowed over the original track. The yo-yo went back to the original owner. The train was bought by a private owner. He basically is an enthusiast of rides, and he also had some hopes of maybe redeveloping Whalom before it became condos. He was one of the first steps between the Buy a Whale project that Allison Bowen did and in between the eminent domain attempt that a lot of people were pushing for. He was trying to see if maybe they can do something to redevelop part or all of the property, and he bought the train, and he bought 4 of the kiddie rides, and he also owns the Flivver ride. So those are stored except for a couple he sold off. He's reverse engineering the train, basically building his own, and he's using Whalom's train as part to do it. One neat thing about Whalom's train is it was actually the last Alan Herschel, but the first Chance Morgan train delivered. Because it was right when the company got sold to Chance Manufacturing. The tip top was scrapped, and both the Historical Society and us both have some of the tubs. Theirs is already rehabbed and on display. Ours is in the process of getting rehabbed, so when we have something we can put it on display. And then the funhouse was demolished, but the contractor that demolished it kept the barrel for himself. So we actually know where that is. I won't give you 2 hints, but it's at one of the many, many haunted houses around New England. Like I said, the gentleman that bought the train also bought some kiddie rides, and then some of the other kiddie rides went to Edaville, and that's actually what I was talking to next. That's my nephew Robert, by the way, in the photo. I didn't steal some random person's photo. They actually bought a number of the kiddie rides, most prominently the satellite jets. They actually operate them today. You can actually ride them at the park. They bought the Tilt-A-Whirl and they bought the Scrambler, but in the case of the Tilt-A-Whirl and the Scrambler, they did what I mentioned that Knoebels did, and they bought those, they had those, and they basically took the set of them and made 2 operational rides out of the set of rides they had. They had also bought the Tumble Bug, but couldn't get it rehabbed to install. And before they could do anything with it, nature took its course and destroyed all the track and a lot of the mechanisms. So ultimately, that ended up needing to be scrapped. But if you ever get out to Edaville, which is right in Carver, Mass, it's not that far away. They have some of Whalom's original rides available to enjoy. And yes, I did enjoy the satellite jets. I rode them with my nieces in my own tub, up and down the whole time. So this is a little bit more about our preservation of the park and what we've been able to do so far. Obviously, we have the Whalom Park Museum in progress. We're going off the Whalom Historical Museum and slowly building from there. As when we get done, feel free to walk around. This is some of the stuff we were able to drag here. When we go to events, we do a little bit of stuff, but a lot of the stuff we don't get to normally bring because we can't bring a lot of this paper stuff to a block party out in the open. And we still have big stuff we weren't able to bring. We had, in the next slide you'll see is we not only saved the one of the bouncer cars, we actually have some of the coaster cars. We have 2 or 3 of them. We have the bumper car body along with the wheels, and a number of little pieces of the roller coaster. We were trying to get a big piece of the coaster, but we had no way to relocate it. Over the years, we've kind of been building from there, we've gone to flea markets, we've used eBay. We try to avoid eBay because it's very expensive. They see Whalom and all of a sudden it's worth about 10 times more than it should. But we've done very well with both flea markets, and we've had a lot of very generous donations over the years. One of the largest ones donated was that scrambler sign in the front of the room right here. As you can see here, we got roller skating skates as well as balls. We have one of those roller skating things on display. Playbill from the dance hall, a scout camp patch, and that's the famous brochure that most of us probably had at one point, and we have a couple of those. So we've kind of been growing from there, trying to find unique items we can, such as the park map and the coloring book. That's buried in one of our boxes over here. Anybody wants to see the whole thing? This is kind of an interesting thing where it says Whalom Park, Lunenburg Mag coloring book. There's not one photo in there about Whalom. It's basically Whalom branded on the front and then a lot of generic, like carnival type pictures on the inside. So it was probably some company that contracted the same idea out to parks and zoos around the world and made their money off of it. As you can see, there's a big giant balloon in the back, and Whalom never had a balloon ride, although it probably would have been a nice view of the lake. And as you can see, we have two of our big posters up on the sides. Those are up on the side there, as well as some of our others. And that kind of wraps up a lot of the history. We're going to invite everybody up. Kim Kovacs been standing behind me. I apologize. She's been kind of hidden behind us, and you talked to Scott earlier. But that gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about ourselves. And you guys can ask some questions in a second. But just to go back to the beginning a little bit more about what we are, is we are the New Whalom Cooperative. Cooperative is basically a business that operates off of personal ownership. So when you go into a cooperative, you get a say in what goes on. So yes, there's a board of directors, yes, there's people managing it and running it, but you're not just sitting there like you own stock, the KFC, and if you're lucky you buy enough KFC, you might get a quarterback. When we have things going on, we actively talk to our members. What do you want to see? What do you want to do? Do you think this is a good idea or a bad idea? And we use that information to basically move forward and progress. And that's how a cooperative works. So basically, instead of owning stock in the company, you have an actual stake in the company because you are technically an owner. And that's what a cooperative is. And that's how we decided to structure it, because we kept hearing that a lot of people were very upset when the park shut down. It's like, well, nobody asked me what I thought about it, and I never heard about it. And even when they shut down, there wasn't much announcement that they were shutting down to give people an opportunity to go see the park again. And a lot of people were upset about that. So it's like, well, how can we rectify that? And when we started hearing about cooperatives that were formed to reopen and expand ski resorts, number of food venues, farms, grocery stores, small consignment shops and things like that, and we started realizing that the cooperative format with both an owner and a actual employee focus seems to be a good way to go. With that, I'm going to have Scott come back up so that everyone can stand in front of you. You can ask any questions you have. Including about the history stuff. I kind of bounced around a lot. I might have missed something. If there was a ride you were curious about, feel free to ask. So I guess right now, it's time to open up for questions. Yes?
What happened to the clown from the funhouse?
Actually, I don't know. I've been really trying to find anyone who bought that, and I have not been able to find any information on it. We did contact the auction company, but there's privacy laws involved, so they can't send me a list of everybody that bought everything. We do know that it was gone before it was torn down. So we know it wasn't there, they just torn down inside. A lot of the props inside did get torn down. Plus you had the fire a little bit before that destroyed some of it. But I don't know what happened to the clown, and all the parks that still had fun houses or still displayed clowns don't have that one because they had their own. Yeah, but it's a great question. Yes?
How about the original woman that was in that fun house?
Again, a lot of these, what was that?
Before the clown.
Before the clown, I don't know. That was a Laughing Sal, I believe, right? Yeah. They have one on display at Hershey Park, but I'm pretty sure that's theirs. And again, a lot of this stuff was like auctioned off or sold off and things like that, kind of under the table, especially later on as things got a little slower. They just pull something out and put something on display, and they put out something similar. And yeah, it's some of the stuff there's not a lot of records of where they went. Any other questions? Yes.
Many of the postcards that you displayed
Yes.
showed that it was saying Fitchburg.
Yes.
Why would it say Fitchburg, other than perhaps just because it's a larger city? Why would it say Fitchburg and not Lunenburg?
Because the Whalom district, because of the Whalom district of where the park's at, phone numbers were like from Lunenburg, addresses were from Fitchburg, so it was like a hodgepodge of different pieces. Once
It's not exactly on the Fitchburg
Yeah.
border.
not anymore. Now it's, Leominster and then Lunenburg, pretty much they divided all the different pieces. And then they had the Lunenburg address and Lunenburg phone numbers. But in the beginning, when it was the Whalom district, it was a district, but it had pieces of all the surrounding towns to kind of
Yeah.
like,
To explain a little bit more about the district is it actually expanded way beyond what the park was. So while the park was kind of the center and the headline of the district, also consisted of shops, summer rentals, small theaters, arcades, and a number of other the food venues, pizza shops, things like that, all around the park. So if you were to think about how it was now, well, the park was on the inside, and then you'd go outside the park, you'd go along the beachfront, and you have the pizza places and the bars and stuff like that. Well, back in the 1900s, in the the time they bought it, 1935, all of those were basically managed under the actual district, and then everything was privately owned. So each ride was individually owned, each attraction was individually owned, each food stand was individually owned, which was actually very, very common for that time. Revere Beach, Palisades Park, Canopy, all of these were operating the same way, Coney Island, where basically you didn't have to own an entire park to be in the amusement business in that area. You just had to have enough money to buy one ride and rent that spot. Think of it as the amusement park version of a mall. It's a good way to describe it. Yes?
After the park closed,
Mhm.
somebody, it might have been somebody from the Bowen family, I'm not sure, raised money to try to buy up some of the Carousel horses.
Yes.
Whatever happened with that?
Well, Allison Bowen was actually trying to raise money to actually buy the park itself. She was trying to reopen it, so she was selling the whales. I believe that's what you're thinking about.
Well, I think it was the Carousel horses.
Well, just before the park closed, and instead of leaving it shut, there was some money raised. There was some, basically some sponsorship that was brought up where the names were put on the Carousel horses. They brought back the Carousel horses they could. They had some donated back to them. And then they leased some off the the New England Carousel Museum down in Bristol, Connecticut, and filled in the menagerie. And everybody who donated money to help them do that got their name on a little plaque on the side of the horse or on the floor by the horse. So that's probably probably what you're thinking about.
Well, could be. I thought
Yeah.
that she was trying to.
Yeah, the original park did the Carousel brought it back because they sold everything off for the money, but they wanted to keep the original mechanism up and running. So what they did is they basically opened that back up. And then when the park closed, everything went back to the original owners. But shortly after, Allison Bowen, that was also in the news, was trying to sell the whales. In fact, most of us on the group at some point bought whales. I bought more than one, to try to raise money towards running the park. When they didn't meet the threshold that they wanted, the whale money was basically returned. The next option was trying to get part of the property bought, so some of it would be developed for something else, some of it would be developed for amusements. That was a gentleman that bought the train and the kiddie rides, so he just wanted a small amusement section with shops and stuff. That kind of fell apart because there was too much back and forth of what was going to happen with the property, and who owned it and who owned what and how it was going to work. Then there was an eminent domain option. A lot of people were pushing for the town to buy it and basically operate as a town park with the amusements. So you'd go back to the free entry, you could just go in, walk around, pay per ride, or buy a band and ride everything you want, which is actually the similar format to how Playland Park is operated down in Rye, New York. That ended up falling apart because some of the, they'll say bigwigs at the time, really wanted to see housing developed because the tax revenue off the housing was much better than they would have gotten off of a park, especially if they bought the park, they'd have no tax revenue. It would be money out with varying money in. So they didn't really like that idea, so that all fell apart. We were actually trying to see as a group, we were in our infancy at the time, around the time all this happened. And we had actually tried to see if there was any opportunity to buy the park because there was a sale value at the time. We were actually down in Florida at the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, talking to banks and lenders of what information we would need and what else we would need to maybe buy the property at the time. And then all of a sudden this news comes up saying that it was purchased. And it was going to become condos. The one plus side of that particular sale is that gentleman was fantastic. He stayed in touch with us. He's the one that actually made sure that we got the coaster cars that we got, the bouncer car that we got. He put us into the warehouse, so we got ring toss bottles and all. When we do go to events and the kids get to play ring toss, they're playing on ring toss bottles that we saved for the property. So the kids are actually playing Whalom ring toss on original ring toss bottles at Whalom. So he was really good about making sure we got some stuff. We got some signs, and I believe the Historical Society got enough stuff too. So he was really good about trying to make sure that whatever could be saved, got saved and not just scrapped. So we appreciate him for that. And then it just, I guess, just recently got sold to a new owner, and they actually.
When the Emerald Place was sold, and I believe now it's called Arriving at Lunenburg, the Emerald Place management called us and said that we don't know what they're going to do with our Whalom collection and stuff, so we're giving it to you. So that's a lot of the stuff here and here that we brought with us. We have one giant sign, which is the original history museum sign from when the museum was at the park. And we got a photo about this size that was of the 1899 water slide, the crazy water slide that everybody gasped over. So that's, we got a picture of that. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we couldn't, bring here today, but this is a sampling of what we have. I don't know how anybody feels about the little tiny gazebo with a handful of postcards on it. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we got involved with this, because there's no, in our opinion, that doesn't define what it was. If anybody was to drive over here and have a slice of pizza and look at that, it wouldn't be what we know of it.
Who operates and maintains that?
That little gazebo thing. The developers, I'm not sure if it's the second developer or the first developer, but that was in their design to build it, and believe that the association is supposed to take care of it, but we don't even know if that's the case.
Well, there's a man that goes down and washes stuff and paints.
Yeah.
Just a neighbor.
So
That's what I was wondering.
There's no one that actually, that I know of. I mean, if it's just a neighbor, obviously, but I don't think there's no organization. There's no anybody with the development that does it. I know that. And when Emerald Place was sold off, their entire management team and everybody went with it. So everything's all new people, new stuff. And we got sad that they sold it, but positive that we got the stuff. That's,
Where was all of that in Emerald Place?
This was in, there was a gentleman who worked at the park as a caretaker. When the park closed, his name was Bill Murphy. He was basically the caretaker, and then he was the last, really last person that actually worked at the park. and he was the first person that actually worked as maintenance for the condo development. And he had a unit in the development, and he had a lot of stuff in his basement. What had happened was there was a fire, and they had since left. He sadly passed away. Some of that collection was put into the actual office area, and then over time was donated to us. In fact, the case here is some of his Bill Murphy stuff, and there's a couple pictures of him in there. That whole case would be on the wall as you walked into the office.
Good. Any other questions?
That photo up
Sorry.
there.
Yep.
What's your plans on the future? Like, you're gonna go move the Whalom Park or?
Yeah, so the new Whalom Cooperative's long-term goal is, as you know, we have an ever-growing museum. We're getting more things through donations, through purchases. And Kip will tell you a little bit more about that.
Okay, so as anyone knows, it takes a process to start anything new. Because we're not starting with a blueprint, we're starting completely from scratch, which means it's either going to be just flat land or already a pre-owned building. So, and we also can't start off big because, never mind with the pandemic that just happened, but everything is more expensive now, and we're basically still trying to build our foundation from the ground up. So what our plan is that we have a 5-year plan. So starting from this year, now that we're getting back out there, we're starting to do our events again. We have donations that we're accepting, whether it's money donations or other memorabilia you want to donate. We also are looking for different crowdfundings to help us at least get the start of our building to build that foundation and then build up from there. So within the next 5 years, based on our business plan, because our business plan is actually halfway done, which we can actually present to other organizations to help us to see if we can get funding through them, like the small business place in Fitchburg, was it?
The chamber.
The chamber, yeah, the Chamber of Commerce. We can always present the business plan to them and to see if we can get funding started. But then the next 5 years, we're hoping to break ground where we can at least start off, whether it's just a museum, or if we can start off even more where it's a museum and arcade with maybe 1 or 2 rides. But you always have to start somewhere. And starting from the smallest area, just to bring back that sense of nostalgia, yeah.
Not nausea.
Yeah.
Nausea.
Only for the roller coaster. Only for roller coaster. Nostalgic feeling is to draw people in and to basically give people the sense of, this is what I did, but now I can take the next generation of individuals and show them exactly the experience that I had when I was younger. At least that's what I want to do, because I mean, I was 8 when Whalom Park closed. I only had 8 years of fun. That's way too short much of fun. I wanted 30 years of fun, because that's how I am now, 30, and they took it away from me.
And now with the sad things of like the Roll in America's gone.
Yep.
Mason's
If you've ever
52 years
noticed,
is gone. And
a lot over the years, we have lost a lot of our amusement areas in here. I think it was around 2010 we lost the Tri-Town Drive-In. Whalom Park also had a drive-in that I have shared on our Facebook page that was open. I like the comment about car hopping from one drive-in to
How many of you
another.
are members of the Facebook page or Whalom Park Memories page, Whalom Park page?
Yeah, so we post a lot of stuff on there.
Cooperative page, that's all us.
So they also had a drive-in that was closed too, and then we just lost Roll in America. I mean, we are getting other places, but it's always nice to bring back something that happened just to give it new life.
We feel that with the amount of history that the park had, that should be shown and spread for future generations.
Yeah,
It shouldn't be, packed up in a case and thrown up into someone's attic.
yeah. So it's always great to remember the past and everything.
We've had people who were deciding to clean out their attic or their basement or their closets, and they come across some of their mementos from Whalom, and then first thing they want to do is talk to the kids to see if they want them, and their kids don't want it. So they said, well, we don't want to throw it out because it meant a lot to us. So they end up contacting us to give it to us. And we take it and preserve it.
So like I said, it's not an easy process. And there has been, I think we have been in operating now, because I joined about 4 years ago. And they have been working on this since the day that Whalom closed. And I'm not gonna lie, there's been a lot of bumps, there's been a lot of setbacks. It's never easy.
2019 was supposed to be our best year. We had our best year, and then we thought 2020 was going to be even better, where we were actually going to get something done. And something happened called the pandemic and COVID-19, and everybody took a nosedive.
So it's
now
basically
we're,
starting there
almost
again.
had to do the reset button and start up again.
But now that we're back on our feet and we're trying to really hard now to get more active, we're hoping that in the future weeks to months, where we start going to other events, or if we start posting online, or even reaching out through flyers posted around the local areas, we're hoping to get businesses and individuals involved to help us, so that together, just like Mike understood with the cooperative, everyone has a say in what we do. So then we're asking the public to then get together so that we can all have a say in how this goes.
Community owned and operated.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yes.
yes.
Has any of the other amusement parks that closed done a similar thing, kind of rejuvenate it?
Yes, to a point. There's actually signs around Rocky Point Park, because that's now a city park. Benson's, which was New England Play World for a couple of years. The entire property is owned by the town. You can actually walk into the gorilla cage. There's little plaques everywhere. So you can say, oh, there used to be alligators here, and there used to be flamingos over here, and you know, these are where the rides, you look over here, this used to be where the train station was, and they actually still have the original train station building. They have a small display of artifacts in the old elephant barn. So they've done that. There's a small museum at Ride Playland, which is still operating. They have a small museum with some of their old ride pieces. Some existing parks like Knoebels operates a museum and a Carousel museum off of memorabilia from things they've taken out, and talks to you about their timeline. The Adora Park, no, not Adora Park. The experience there, the
Adora Park.
Adora Park, I did have it right.
From Youngstown, Ohio. They had a park similar to what Whalom was. And this husband and wife team, well, the husband, and then he convinced his wife, let's put it that way, started to find pieces, and basically in the same kind of idea of us, they started to build a collection. They have a garage on their property where they house all these pieces, some ride pieces and things, and they have what they call the Adora Park experience, where they bring people in 4 times a year and basically go through everything. They have a small arcade with it. They've written books on the experience, and they still expand the collection.
And mentioning the arcade, one of the items we do have is one of our member owners, to become a member owner, donated his skee ball machine, a 1968 skee ball machine from Whalom Park, to the group, which is actually in the process of being rehabbed. So when we do have something up and running that people can come to, the skee ball is going to be basically up and running as an interactive museum piece. And one neat thing about that particular skee ball is it's old enough that it actually works off both dimes and quarters. So if you played off a dime, you'd get paid out 1, but if you used a quarter, it paid out 3 for whatever score you got. So that's the first being rehabbed. Yes?
You know, I went to a lecture at the college many years ago on industry.
Yep.
I'm sure you have that,
Yes.
because that really saddened me
Yep.
to see where it was and what it became. Oh,
This is the one about 8 years ago?
no, more than that.
Okay, because we did one about 80 years ago or so at the college.
One of the students
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
that did it for one of his classes.
Yes.
Oh, you mean
Oh,
the documentary film?
Yeah.
Yes.
That gentleman, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, he did a good job. Yeah.
It really brought you into it. And if you notice that our presentation didn't have any of the, the stripping or the destruction or any of those pieces. Because we feel that that's not the message we want to send here. Everybody knows what happened to it. We don't need to keep showing people what happened to it.
The Whalom should be seen as more of a in transition as opposed to closed. And that's the way we've always seen it. Is that there's enough there and enough history and enough memories and fun involved that it can just eventually rise back up like a phoenix somewhere else.
Or think of it as it going out of its one phase and into another phase.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Sorry, did you? Actually, I want to correct one thing. The Pirate's Den, I kind of skipped on the manufacturer. The manufacturer of the ride mechanism is a ride called Pretzel. Sounds weird, I know it's a snack food, but that's the company that made that particular one. They actually still have a similar card mechanism operating in Knoebels. And that type of mechanism is the base mechanism at Ride Playland for the Zombie Castle, but they build custom cars for it. So I wanted to correct it and mention that it's a Pretzel dark ride and not Alan Herschel. So anyone else have any questions about our group or the history of Whalom? All right.
Thanks for taking the time.
So feel free to come up, check out the museum items we have on display. We also have a sales table available off to the side, t-shirts, buttons, pins.
All donations or anything that's bought will go straight to that foundation I mentioned earlier about getting started and at least trying to find a property for us to at least get started with.
We take cash and debit.
Yeah, we take cash or card.